The whole immersion thing is that people get as much input, like you listen, you read, as possible, because they're kind of saying you can't speak when you don't understand, you know? And one of the things about the accent is it's recommended that people don't start speaking right off the bat, or if they do, to be making sure they're getting a lot of input, because you don't know what the language is supposed to sound like yet.
My name is Daniel and I am an English learner, and actually I started out podcasting to become fluent in English. So this is my method. In the beginning I made a monologue and then I interviewed other people. First off, congratulations to your great pronunciation and to what you have reached on your project. I would like to give a bit of a backstory how this conversation came to be. So actually I discovered your video which says 3,000 hours of immersion equals fluent ? And then I watched it, and I also watched your video where you spoke in German after 3 years of immersion learning, and it just blew me away.
Ich kann mich mit denen nicht vergleichen. Ja, aber ja, es ist nicht so gut, mit anderen sich selbst zu vergleichen. Es ist ungesund. Ja, aber vielleicht für andere Leute, die schon Deutsch lernen, ist dieses Video hoffentlich hilfreich. Und
I thought that you were a native speaker because your pronunciation was so great, and then I thought it would really be great to learn more about this method, because you learned German through immersion. And so I thought, yeah, but how exactly? And I didn't see that you wrote something about you. And also, if I am not mistaken, in your very first video you didn't talk about you or who you are. And so the idea of this conversation now is to give the audience the idea of your language learning journey, and also we want to know what it means to learn through immersion. It's really great because you kept track of all of your language journey and you made a lot of videos, and that's kind of the reason why we are here. And now I will give you the opportunity to speak, because that's why you are here. So could you please give us a little introduction who you are?
Yeah, so my name is India. I'm from Ireland. At the moment, I'm 28. I just turned 28. And yeah, I suppose with the language, how that started, I think it was almost 5 years ago. I think I started in 2019. And I don't know, I got it into my head one day that I was going to learn German, which is a little bit ironic because I took German in secondary school for 1 year and I hated it. I was 12 or 13. I hated it. I was like, this is the most horrible class I've ever been in. Can I go home, please? But yeah, I'd always had an interest in like German history, and I would read books and listen to audiobooks about that. So I think it stemmed from liking how it sounded, and then it kind of just went from there. Yeah.
So the inspiration came from how the German language sounded. So can you give us a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah. So I used to listen to a lot of audiobooks when I was working. So I worked during like my secondary school and through college very part-time at like a local business, and I was able to listen to music or books or whatever when I was working. That was fine. So I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and I liked things to do with World War II for some reason. And I always liked it when the narrators pronounced the like German place names properly. I was like, ooh, cool. Like, why? I can't pronounce that right now, but I would like to be able to pronounce it, you know? So I think I was, a bit intrigued by the pronunciation. And then in that same job, at some point, I met a girl from Germany, and I was like, oh, wow. Okay, so the language exists in a country somewhere. It's not just in an audiobook. And And just hearing her speak a little bit of German, I was like, wow, that it sounds cool. So it was very much the sound of the language that I think initially got me interested in trying to actually learn it. Yeah,
But
kind of
you
the history and like that.
communicated with your friend, you communicated in English, right?
Yeah, exactly. So she was over in Ireland for a few weeks to work during the summer. She was still in school, and we just became friends. Like we're still friends now. So we speak a bit of German every now and again, which is nice. But yeah, she was the first like German friend that I met, and she told me how to say apple, and then she told me the difference between apple and Äpfel. And I was like, oh, okay, so the A sounds different as it. And I was like, okay, cool, cool. So it just started with that. Yeah,
And
she kind of sparked the interest.
and when you were listening to the audiobooks, so they were in English, right? But
Yep.
you just noticed the names of the places and stuff like that that were German, and that kind of intrigued you or made you
Big
curious
time.
about the
Yeah,
language. Okay.
definitely. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And may I ask you, what role does other languages than English play in Ireland?
Yeah, it's an interesting
Do you,
situation.
I mean, do you have to learn a
Hmm.
lot of languages and stuff like that in
Yeah,
Ireland?
so I think I don't know if a lot of people know, but Ireland has like a native language, so we're technically a bilingual country. Like by law, everything has to be in English and in Irish. So it's mandatory for kids to start learning Irish as soon as they start school. So from 5 or 6 years old, all the way up until whenever you leave, 18. So I learned Irish mandatory, had to learn it for 14 years, but I cannot speak Irish. And I hated every single class of Irish that I had. It was awful because I saw no point to it, Like the only reason that you would need to learn Irish in Ireland is if you wanted to work in a primary school, you wanted to teach children, you had to be able to speak Irish. Or if you wanted to work in some sort of government thing that needed Irish. But other than that, every day there was no reason to learn it. So I think a lot of people resent having to learn it, which, in hindsight is a bit sad. I tried to go back and learn a bit of Irish, but I still, yeah, my experience in school has soured it a bit, unfortunately. Yeah, but we learned that, and then in secondary school, so from 12 or 13, you have to pick another language. So I started with German, and then I ended up dropping a second language. I didn't do one after that. But most people would do French or Spanish. Like German isn't the most common language to choose.
And you took a class in German, I think, in the Goethe Institute, but you didn't like it that much. Can you tell us more
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, so after I made this decision to learn German, I was like, right, so I'm very serious. And I remember sitting in Starbucks one day being like, okay, how am I going to do this? And I thought, right, I'm serious. I'm going to go take a class. So I looked up online what kind of German classes were in my area. And because I live relatively close to the city centre, yeah, the Goethe Institute came up. So I signed up for that. And it was a very nice class. Like the teacher was very nice. The people were very nice. I was very excited. I had all these books about language learning stuff. But yeah, I don't know, I didn't like how the class kind of went. It felt a bit boring. I think I did it for 3 or 4 months. So I did the first half of the A1 level. So I didn't even finish the entire level. I did A1.1. And I just got a bit bored. And I had discovered...
But why was it boring? Was it boring because it was too easy for you?
No, it wasn't that. I think I had done like 2 or 3 weeks of like very, very early German stuff online before I started the class, so I was brand new basic. I was just a bit like, I don't want to have to sit down and learn vocabulary, and I don't want to have to sit down and learn the grammar. Like that part of it wasn't interesting for me. The part of German that was interesting was like, I don't know, being able to pronounce things, I suppose, a little bit, but also I didn't feel like I was using it. I felt like I was in school learning a language. And even though I was excited about it, I still was like, oh, I'm not excited to do this, that wasn't what I had wanted to do. I don't know. Does that answer the question properly? I don't remember exactly why I
Yes,
didn't like it.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
and what did you do next? I mean,
Mm.
which journey did you make then?
Yeah, so after that, I did some calculations as to how much was I paying for these classes, and if I were to pay the same amount on italkies and just do online classes, like what would the equivalent of that be? So I worked that out and I found a teacher and I started doing just conversation classes on italki, and I think I did that for like 6 months. But that was a little bit better. It was more interesting, but I don't think I was using the classes very well. That was the problem. Because I wasn't necessarily learning anything. I was trying to say something, and then the teacher would explain how I was to say this, but I wasn't remembering anything. So it was interesting because I was interacting with the language a bit more directly than I was with the class, it felt. Because I think the first teacher I had was actually from Switzerland, which was interesting. And she was very good. Yeah. I think I lucked out a bit. I got a professional teacher who was just starting on italki, so their prices were still very, very low. So I got quite nice classes until she put up her prices to, actual prices. So yeah, I did that for like 6 months. And during this whole time, I was listening to a lot of language learning content, like podcasts, and I was watching a lot of YouTube videos, and I was reading a lot of books by other language learners and things like that. And I came across, I think I mentioned this in one of my videos, that I came across, oh shoot, what's his name? Pablo from Dreaming Spanish. I think that's his name. Yeah, I listened to the episode that he did with, I think it was Actual Fluency, and he was talking about the method he'd found to learn Japanese, and it was called AJATT, all Japanese all the time. And as he was explaining this, I was like, what is this? This sounds insane. And I remember making a note on my phone because I was out on a walk, and I made a note on my phone. I just wrote down AJATT, so I had to look it up when I got home. And I started Googling, what is this? And I found some videos on YouTube. I don't know if some people might be familiar with Matt versus Japan. He would be one of the people that would be very well known for doing AJATT. And I watched his stuff, and then I found the website that has, it's like a blog, AJATT, it's like a blog. And I found that, and it was this guy explaining how he went about learning Japanese through just listening to Japanese, like all day, every day, no excuses, and he would supplement that with like Anki and things like that. But his whole blog, it was like a step-by-step mindset instruction manual, and I decided I was gonna spend a few days, read the entire thing, and I did, and I was like, I'm doing it. So I was just really caught by it. It fit my mindset, and it fit how I had done things in the past. I kind of go all in on things. So after I kind of discovered that, I was like, right, I'm gonna switch everything to German. I think I gave myself 2 weeks. I was like, right, I'm gonna, take these 2 weeks and slowly switch everything over. So all the TV shows that I was watching, music that I was listening to, all that kind of stuff, find new content. And I did that, and I don't know how I did that, because I look back and I was like, that's insane. Like, I couldn't understand anything. Like, I couldn't. Like, I don't know. Like, yeah. Anyway, so that was like the start of that.
But how could you cope with that, given that you didn't understand anything in the beginning?
Yeah.
You just kept going with this.
Yeah, exactly. I look back on that now and I'm like, I don't know if I could do it again. But the thing was, I was so excited about German. I was just so excited that I was so happy to watch. I don't know what I started watching the first thing, but I understood like 20 or 30% of the words that was in the TV show I was watching. But I was like, ooh, I caught that word. Ooh, I know what that means. And I'm watching actual things in German. And I think the fact that I was watching, like, I'm going to say like in like real media was so much more exciting than being in a class. because I was understanding like real German, you know? Um, so I think the enthusiasm pushed me through the beginning.
Did you actually watch German series in the beginning that
No.
came originally from Germany?
Yeah, no, that's a good distinction. I started rewatching things that I had already watched. That was one of the big things that I did because of Netflix. It's easy to watch kind of dubbed content. So that's what I started doing in the beginning. I was rewatching a TV show I'd already seen before. So I knew what was happening because I'd watched it in English. Like I think I watched Stranger Things was one of the early ones that I watched. So it was entertaining enough just to visually look at the show. And I remember at that time I was maybe, I don't know, how far in was I? A few months into it. And I thought I understood 20 to 30% of what the children were saying, like not even the adults, the children, you know? I think it was a little while before I started watching native German content, because I find it was quite enjoyable to rewatch things with just the German dub. But what I was doing alongside this, like another part of what AJATT recommended at the time, was you supplement this immersion with learning vocabulary somehow. And the way that the guy like originally did it was with Anki. I don't know, do you use Anki or you know it?
Yes, I know it. I used to use it, but nowadays I'm doing other stuff. But could you give us a little introduction or what it means?
Yeah, so Anki is like a software that is just like a digital version of flashcards, and it has an algorithm that will determine when it's going to show you this card. So I think there's like a physical version of it. It's sort of like, I think it's called a Lightner box, where it's like you review a card and then you push it back 3 days and you review it in 3 days, and then the next time you review it maybe is a week. So you're extending these intervals of when you see this piece of information. So the idea behind it is that you're like going with the forgetting curve. There's some mathematician or someone who discovered this, but it's called spaced repetition. So you review it on the first day, you kind of remember it, you review it day 3 a bit, so it's just supposed to be a bit more of a like smart way to do it, and this is just the digital version of that. So you make a flashcard and it'll show you, technically just before it thinks you're going to forget it. So that's sort of how Anki works, and how this.
But it's a bit controversial too, right? Because, for example, Luca Lamperiello, it's a polyglot, who says that you should use Anki. And I have written down some notes why he thinks you should not use it. And maybe from your experience, because you used it for a long time, maybe you can give us your opinion on what I am gonna read out loud right now. So he says, don't use Anki to learn vocabulary in a foreign language because 1. Making flashcards wastes learning time. He says. Would you agree with him? That
I
making
think there's a very big
flashcards
difference.
wastes learning time.
It depends how you're doing it, because I would agree that if you download a deck, or if you make a deck of just vocabulary, so it says like Hund on the front and dog on the back, and you do that is probably a waste of time. Yeah. I think the difference with how I used Anki and how people within this sort of method used it is that they didn't see it as learning the cards in Anki. I think Matt Verstran has a good explanation as to what he thinks it is, but it's sort of like introducing you to a word. And the most important part of this whole method is your immersion. So say you've never heard the word Hund before, but you see it in an Anki card and you're like, oh, that exists. Okay. You don't necessarily remember it means dog, but maybe you see that in a TV show that you're watching and you're like, oh, that was in my cards yesterday. I don't remember what it means, but I remember that I saw it. So the point is you're not actually supposed to be learning anything in Anki. You're supposed to just be being made aware of something in Anki and then seeing it in your immersion. So yeah, I would say that if you're just spending all your time trying to actually learn things in a program, it's too isolated. Like you need to be able to be exposed to it in all these different situations and you get a feel for it. And another thing that a lot of people, which I would agree with, a lot of people say is not good about flashcards is most people just use it as a translation, and you only use one word. So the example of Hund, that's a bit boring, you know, but one of the big parts of this method was you use entire sentences. You never just put one word on a card. You say, das ist mein Hund, or whatever. You have a whole sentence on your card so that you're getting a little bit of grammar and you're getting other words that you already know in this sentence. And then maybe in the beginning, you have the English on the back, but the goal is as quickly as possible to not use any English on your cards. So once, I think I have it in my notes somewhere, I think after like 4 or 5 months, I started making my card definitions monolingual. So I started using a really simple German dictionary to explain the new words that I was learning, which sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Maybe the definition had more words that I didn't know. So I would make a new card for that word in the definition, and I do that in English. And that's another thing that people using this method would do. They would try to make a monolingual card, but then they'd learn the words in the definition that they don't know, and then they'd go back and be able to use that definition for some other word. So that's like the goal. The goal is for it to, one, be monolingual, have a sentence, but then also don't worry too much about knowing the card. You just want to be familiar with it. But even with that, some people don't like Anki. Like, and that's completely fine. It's not for some people, and it just happened to work for me. Because
because India, it goes further. The second point that he is making is adding new cards can become an addiction.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It can. Some people are, because there's a lot of like Discord servers of people who would be doing immersion learning, and you get a really mixed bag of people who have good experience with Anki and people who have terrible experience with Anki. Some people are able to use it, you know, really consistently and they don't get too caught up in it. And some people just get too caught up in making sure they're doing it every day, and it becomes more about doing Anki than actually learning anything. So it can, again, I think it depends on the person. You know, if you try it and you find yourself getting stuck in this like numbers game of like, oh, I need to have this many cards, you know. I don't think I got stuck in that. For the most part, I used like other software to make cards for me, so I didn't have to spend too much time doing that. But as long as it's, you know, healthy in the way that you're using it, if it works for you, do it. If it doesn't work and you're getting distracted, well then drop it. You know, it's whatever works. It doesn't necessarily matter what you're doing as long as you're actually doing something.
Absolutely. And I think it always depends because every person is different, obviously.
Yeah.
And the third point that he's making is reviewing old cards can become a chore, right? So again, I think, if you don't like doing it, then of course it will become a chore. But if you are passionate about it and if you are making it interesting with content from maybe what you watched or content from wherever, then it can become very interesting. And the fourth point was that flashcards take language out of context. But I think that is not true because it depends how you are using Anki. If you are writing down words from your context from movies, then they are not out of context. So for me, it's a little bit narrow-sighted in a way.
Yeah, I would imagine those points all are thinking of people using Anki in one specific way, and if someone's using it in that way, well then all those points are completely valid. Exactly. And yet sometimes like reviewing old cards, like I used to get cards that I would have made a year ago and haven't seen in 4 months. And I'm like, why? I know this card. I would get to the stage where I would just start deleting cards. And like, that's another thing that people are in the immersion thing. It's like, if you don't want it, just delete it. Just delete it. It doesn't matter, you know? So the whole like thought behind everything is you have to be enjoying what you're doing. Otherwise it's not going to work. Because if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to be like in the right mindset, you know? So that was another thing I started doing. I started just deleting cards if I didn't like them. But then, like you were saying, to keep it interesting, like my Anki cards, for the most part, they had a picture of the TV show. So I would always get something from a TV show. So in the beginning, I was using, I think, the show Big Mouth. That was, for some reason, I had cards from that. So it was a subtitle line from Big Mouth. It had a picture of the TV show. Sometimes it had the audio. It didn't always match up, though, because the subtitles were different than the dubs. But anyway, so like the vast majority of my cards for quite a long time had a picture
India.
and audio. Yeah.
Sorry, India, for interrupting you, but that is actually a good point to discuss the subs that you mentioned that are not the same than the spoken words, because it happened to me a lot and it bothers me a lot, and I don't know why this can happen.
Yeah, I know. That confused me so much in the beginning until I started thinking about how translation works. I was actually just talking to someone the other day who is like a professional translator, and we had a whole discussion about this. And I was like, okay, my assumption was correct, that like when you're translating just for subtitles, it's a lot less restrictive. But when you're translating for a dub, you have to fit your translation into the exact time that the original actor is speaking in. So you're so much more restricted. So it doesn't always allow you to have it the exact same, which was very frustrating in the beginning. But I actually didn't use subtitles while I was watching things for a long time. So I didn't notice until, I don't know, quite a bit in. But then even when you have like native German things, the subtitles sometimes still don't work because the subtitle lines would be so long. They condense them down. So it's frustrating. Yeah, so that can
Sorry,
be
I
an issue.
interrupted
you. Just have to...
I interrupted you when you were explaining what you put all in your cards. And I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, like that's...
I'm really sorry.
No, you're grand. I think that's another part of, I suppose, like immersion kind of learning, is that, you want to make your Anki fun. So when I was trying to get back into Anki recently, I was able to filter through all my cards, because I've been making cards for like, not consistently, but I made cards consistently for the first 2 years. So I have a giant backlog, and I went through and I filtered by a TV show that I really liked. I was like, right, I'm going to go and review all the cards from this TV show. So my cards were a picture from the TV show, the subtitle line on the front, and then I switch it around sometimes. Sometimes the audio is on the back, sometimes the audio is on the front, sometimes there's no text on the front, sometimes it's just the audio on the front. It kind of, I don't know, you can experiment, whichever is most interesting. So it was almost like rewatching the show a little bit, you know, you get little reminders of it. So I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with Anki. Like if you look into Anki properly, you can customize the heck out of everything. And I think because like Japanese learners tend to be very intense, they make really, really good tools, which is cool for Anki specifically. So there's this tool called Subs to SRS. And if you have the video file of a TV show and you have a subtitle file, you throw those into the program and it makes an entire Anki deck automatically for you with each card, with a picture, with the subtitle line and the audio. And it's great. So you can have like a whole bank of
that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it just takes the effort out, because part of what is recommended in the like immersion is that it's called sentence mining. So to learn new words, you take words from the shows or whatever you're watching, but you'd have to do that manually, and it takes a long time, you know. If I see a sentence I want to have, I have to... Yeah, exactly. Or anything. Like you can take example sentences from anything. And I was really lazy. I knew I
Because
wouldn't do this. So I used like pre-made things. Yeah.
because you actually mined a whole grammar book.
I didn't get all the way through.
And
I did a bit and I was like, oh, interesting. And then I stopped after a little bit. I tried.
I can imagine, yes.
Yeah, but that is the thing that some people recommend to do. Yeah. Hmm.
And at a certain point, you decided to keep track of all of your language journey. And
Hmm.
how did that come?
Yeah. Um, I think for the first while I had been estimating that I was spending maybe 5 or 6 hours a day. I don't know. And then I did a little experiment and I started tracking how much I was doing. And I was like, oh, I'm actually not doing as much as I thought I was. And the time tracking is, again, in the kind of community of immersion learners, very common. I will preface some people hate time tracking and it does not work for them and it is like counterproductive. Some people love it and it motivates them. It depends which person you are, you know? So I wouldn't necessarily say everybody should track their time. It, depends. But I find it really motivating. So yeah, I actually have I found it earlier today. I started writing down my times. It's a lot. Hang on. And then I eventually moved to a spreadsheet. Um, I don't know. If I hold this up to the camera, I'm sure you can see it's like every day is like
Yeah.
one line. And I would split it down into all the different categories. So how many episodes of a TV show had I watched that day? How many hours of podcasts had I listened to that day? Because everything could be tracked. And it did start getting a bit too much because I realized once I wrote all this down in the evening, sometimes I would think, oh, well, there's no point listening to more German because I've already logged my hours. So it's not going to add to my numbers, which was silly. It doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, the tracking can go either way. But for the most part, it was very motivating. I could see I was, I don't know, consistently doing 4 hours or 5 hours, and I had a good month and I was 6 hours a day and stuff like this. And then, yeah, I have a digital version of that I kept for a year and a half, maybe. I think I tracked for like 2 years. So I have 2 years-ish. Not quite sure.
And
maybe a year.
what were the media that you watched the most or consumed the most?
It was sort of 50-50 between Netflix and YouTube. So over however many months of me kind of figuring out what content to watch, I found some YouTube channels that I liked that I could, follow. And so it was a mix of those two things. I would mainly try and like actively watch things. And then listening to podcasts would be something that I would do like in between. Like if I was going down to make food, I would like have one of my like earbuds. And that was constant. That was just a habit. Like whenever I left my desk, I had an earbud in and there was a podcast playing. And that's another part of the immersion, is just to use all these like dead time and to get as much in as you could. In the beginning, I think I was probably too much with this because there was 1 or 2 times my sister said to me, she's like, Indi, you're being a bit rude. We're out on a walk together. Could you take your headphones out? And I was like, no, but I'm learning, But I took it very seriously because the goal was 24 hours, and, I couldn't do 24 hours. That doesn't make any sense. But the goal was as much as possible. So I did as much as possible, But I don't know. It's, you can find what actually works. Some people can't do that. They have, families and things like that they need to pay attention to. I was by myself. It didn't matter. So it was okay.
I mean, how do people react when they learn about your learning method? How did people generally react to that?
I think that for the most part,
Because it's not a typical way to learn,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah, I know. No, it's definitely not. It's like when I would tell my friends, I wouldn't really go into detail. I would just say, "Oh, I just watch everything in German." They go, "Oh, okay," and that would be that. But if I was talking to a teacher, they'd be like, "What? So you don't really take classes?" And I was like, "No, don't really like it." And they'd be like, "Oh, that's really interesting," you know. They would be a bit, I suppose, impressed. I suppose it depends when someone had been speaking to me, like how long I had been doing it, because I think the thing that became obvious very quickly was that my comprehension was very high for how long I had been learning, and that's the thing that still even now is quite different from other learners, is that I have very good listening comprehension in particular, like not necessarily that I know a lot of words, but that when I'm listening to like reality TV shows, like I really like watching those. I feel like I can watch them because it's in German, so I'm learning something. So I'm just watching like reality dating shows and it's great. But I can understand those easily. Like obviously there's some parts that I don't hear because of mumbling or just whatever. And it wouldn't be at the level of a native. It's not like that great. But I do have some friends who would be learning German and they're like, "Oh, you can watch that and you can understand it." And I was like, "Yeah, of course I can." And so that's the big thing that seems to stick out, is the listening comprehension. Yeah, which I suppose makes sense. I've got a few thousand hours in listening, so you get used to it.
And you tracked down the hours, but in the tracking sheet, I didn't see any topic about the speaking time.
Yeah, I didn't really, apart from very occasional Italki classes where I would check back in with my old teachers that I'd started with. And I would think, okay, are they going to notice? Am I any better? And the first few times I had a class after doing maybe 6 months of immersion, they were like, "Oh, I mean, yeah, you haven't gotten any worse. It's fine." Because I said I hadn't practiced speaking in a long time. But then after a year and a half, 2 years, it was obvious that like my vocabulary had grown a lot and that my accent had gotten a lot better because I knew what it was supposed to sound like now, whereas before it was very, very English, you know?
But how
So
come
I did.
that you knew it? Because you didn't practice it. How come that you reached to have such a great accent, such a great pronunciation?
Yeah, that's that's part of the whole immersion thing, is that people. Oh, yeah, I haven't explained exactly what this immersion method is. Sorry. So the point is that you get as much input, like you listen, you read, as possible, because they're kind of saying you can't speak when you don't understand, you know? And one of the things about the accent is it's recommended that people don't start speaking right off the bat, or if they do, to be making sure they're getting a lot of input, because you don't know what the language is supposed to sound like yet. You know, like back in the beginning, I hadn't listened to enough German to know what it was supposed to sound like. So when I spoke, I didn't hear how different my pronunciation was from what it should be. And the idea is that when you get enough exposure, you build up an intuition for how the language is supposed to sound, so that when you speak, you can hear that you don't sound correct and you can self-correct a lot more easily. Obviously, you're not going to get to an absolutely perfect accent without speaking practice and talking with native people, you know, but you can get a very decent amount of the way there just by building this like internal model of the language in your head. Because I suppose like in everyone's native language, they can hear when someone has an accent and they can hear when something doesn't sound quite right, because they're so used to hearing this language and they've heard it for thousands and thousands of hours. So it's that. But I think also because I had an interest in the accent, I was probably paying more attention when I did speak. I wanted to try and sound good. So Like I haven't put any significant amount of time into pronunciation. Every now and again I would try and, say something. And I remember specifically, the only thing I remember specifically training myself was the CH in the beginning, because I just couldn't do it. Like my throat was sore. Like I was trying to say buch. I was like, buch. It was a lot.
Like the Swiss people are speaking, or like
oh my God,
I am speaking with a
the Swiss. It's so, oh my goodness, I don't know how you have any throat left. It sounds like you're about to vomit something up. I've heard Swiss German, I'm like, what is it? It's a lot, exactly. So I suppose in comparison, the German accent sounds very soft and whatever. I think that was the main thing that I practiced. And then the other thing that's a little bit difficult even now is the or, because sometimes it's like soft and sometimes it's hard. I'm trying to think of a word that has an or in it now. Fahrrad, yeah, like the is it? I don't know. Anyway, so that's about pronunciation. Yeah, it's supposed to be like you internalize the pronunciation, and then you can self-correct.
It's very interesting what you said about the pronunciation, and to me, it seems to me a little bit that there is a misconception in general that people think they have to attend classes or that they have to speak a lot to being able to speak. And I mean, you are a good example that shows us that it is possible, as you said, to a certain point to reach a very, very high level.
Yeah, it's totally possible. But it's also like some people, like I'm a very introverted person, so I don't really need to talk to that many people, So that was fine for me. I didn't have a problem. But some people really, really enjoy talking to people. And that's part of their like motivation and excitement for the language. So it wouldn't make sense for that person to not talk to anybody, So again, it's like what works for you. I would still encourage like a lot of input because it's only going to help, And another thing about potentially speaking a lot from the very beginning and not being too strict about pronunciation is you can make bad habits and then not notice them. Like I know that's a big thing with a lot of like expats that move to a country and they have the same problems for 10 plus years and they never seem to get better. It's because it's so ingrained from the very beginning that it's very difficult to change. So one of the ideas is you don't make the bad habits in the beginning. You start off on a stronger foot. I think that's the kind of the gist of it. Yeah.
That means that maybe the method of immersion is more for introverted people. What would you say? So in your experience, I'm sure that you know a lot of people who were using it or are still using it. Would you say that the main part are more introverted people?
Yeah, from a lot of the people that I've interacted with that do immersion learning, it is very well suited to the introvert. It's just their natural state. You want to stay inside and watch TV and not talk to people, and that's perfect. That's not to say that it can't work for more extroverted people. Extroverted people just want to communicate faster, which is fine. Like it can still work. Just have to get your input, but it does attract the more introverted people, definitely. It was a big pull, and that's why it was so easy for me, because my lifestyle was the same. It was just in English, Yeah, so I'll say that it suited me very well, and that's why it worked. It's not to say that it will work for everybody, it's kind of preference.
And you then kept track of your journey also in form of a YouTube channel. How came that to be? I mean, what was the inspiration or motivation of that?
Yeah, so within the community of like immersion learning, so it started with this AJATT thing, which was just about Japanese, and it was very intense. Like it was twice as intense as I had ever been. Like these people are insane, and they were doing 10 hours a day. I don't know what they were doing anyway. And then it kind of moved to a different program, I suppose we'll say, with Matt versus Japan. There was like MIA, and I think it was called the mass immersion approach, right? And that's what they were marketing it as. But under that umbrella, people started making update videos, which I thought was so interesting because you could see someone, I don't know, their first month of immersion, and they, you know, they can't understand anything, and then they do a 3-month, and then they do a 6-month update, and then they do a 12-month update, and then it's 18 months. And being able to see someone's progression like that was so exciting for me, because I was thinking, oh goodness, okay, I'm doing similar things to this person, therefore my results could potentially be similar to them in a year and a half, you know? So I kind of wanted to add to that. And because all of this immersion stuff was mainly around Japanese and some Chinese and some Korean, it was a lot of Asian languages, there wasn't really anyone at the time doing specifically for German. There wasn't anyone. There might have been someone doing updates for, I think there was Spanish and then French. Yeah, there was someone that I watched that was doing French updates. So it was more like the European languages, because I suppose when you're a native English speaker, European languages are not as different from English as, say, Japanese would be. So the timelines would be kind of different for the two different like language families. They're very far apart. So I thought it'd be interesting to give people a bit of an idea of the timeline, I suppose, for more European languages. I thought it'd be interesting for me to look back on as well, you know, because I don't remember exactly what I was doing 6 months in, you know, but I can watch that video and see what I was watching and how much I was understanding. So it's cool to look back, because it seems so, like, of course I can understand German. I've been able to understand it for a few years, so I can't remember what it's like to not understand it, but I have videos, so it's nice, like a time capsule.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Korean, and then that reminds me that you also watched series or movies which came from Korea, but you learned German with them. It's kind of a funny picture in my mind to learn from a Korean series, but you are learning or using it for German learning. It's kind of funny in a way.
It is, yeah. And actually the first like new TV show that I watched, like something that wasn't Rewatching, was a K-drama. It was dubbed in German though. I think there's a few that are dubbed in German, but most of them were subtitled. So I was sort of learning reading at the same time. You know, it was more reading than listening. But it was fun. It was just, I was watching whatever I wanted to watch. It didn't matter if it was actually German or not, because that would have been a bit more restrictive. So I did whatever was interesting, and that's probably the main reason I kept going with it. Yeah.
And I noticed in one of your videos that you were saying that you were not the best example, and I think you were comparing yourself to others, maybe other people who were also making videos. And can you tell us a little bit about maybe the problem to compare ourselves to others, and then like having a negative mindset, or maybe just being negative and not being content with ourselves?
Yeah, that was a big issue, because like in the beginning I would be comparing myself to people who were learning Japanese, and these guys were insane. As I said, they're just doing so many hours a day. It was a lot, you know. They were really, really dedicated. So, and the other problem was I didn't speak Japanese. I don't know how well they were speaking. They could have been speaking terribly. I would have no way of knowing. And so I would compare myself to them and be like, oh, I'm probably not that good yet. Okay, we'll wait a while. And then when the European thing started coming out, I was like, oh, they seem really confident, you know? So yeah, I kind of got down on myself a lot about that, because I thought I should be better at speaking, or I should be better at something else, because these people were doing it and they were only at, you know, around about the same time as me. But I think I noticed like I was doing things a little bit differently, and some people were more focused on reading, so their vocabulary was really, really high. But maybe their listening comprehension wasn't as good. I don't know. Yeah, I had to be a bit careful about that. I still don't. A part of the problem as well was that I assumed that I would be really good at speaking, but I didn't know what really good at speaking meant. You know, like I can speak German now, but it doesn't feel good, and it's not what I imagined myself to feel like when I could like speak German, you know? So I kind of am comparing myself to like what my like imagination was creating for me, which isn't reality at all, you know? It's very different.
I see, I understand, but I assume that, of course, because if you don't have the practice, then, I mean, the speaking practice, then you just need a little bit more time and then it would come out more fluently, I guess. And it would
Yeah.
take no time at all, just a little bit. It's just my
Yeah,
assumption.
it's I know, I think so as well. Like I was actually in Berlin over the summer for a language program. I actually did the Easy German summer school. I don't know if people know that, but it was cool. So I got to meet that team and everyone. But that was all in German, and this was the first time I had spoken German for any prolonged amount of time. And after the first day, I was like, okay, I just have to get over the fact I know I'm making mistakes and just go for it. So I spoke German for 2 weeks, and that was fine. I didn't have problems, you know, being understood by other people. So that was a really interesting experience. That was the first time I've properly spoken. And yeah, I mean, it seems to have worked out. You need that like activation time, it seems, you know? But there's still a lot of things to improve on. Yeah.
And are there some challenges in the process that you faced?
Yeah. I don't think. See, I have like a journal thing that I would write down in every couple of months to like check in with myself. And I kept seeing that I was mentioning motivation, but I don't think the problem was motivation. I think I had the intrinsic motivation that I was not gonna, you know, stop doing what I was doing, but I almost didn't believe that it would work. So I kept having to go back and like watch all these videos of other people and be like, okay, no, it should work. So that was a problem. And figuring out like, was I on track? Was I doing it correctly? Was I doing it in the most optimal way? So that was sort of a struggle, kind of believing that it would work, even though I technically knew it would, but I kind of didn't believe it, if that makes sense. And then any other more practical struggles. Yeah, one of the things that I definitely noticed in kind of years 2 up until now, I suppose, is that I got so comfortable with not understanding everything, which in itself is kind of good. Like, if you want to do immersion, you have to be comfortable with the ambiguity, because if you're not, it's going to be really frustrating. But I got so comfortable with not knowing all of the words. Like, I could understand everything. That was happening, you know, and I'd have a cloudy understanding of other things. But I think I let that get a bit too I was a bit too comfortable with it, and I wasn't trying to figure out what all these new words meant. And I think if I'd been a bit more intentional about that, I would have made more progress. Because I was doing a super relaxed version at that stage. I was just watching things and I wasn't thinking about it too much, which isn't bad, but I maybe would have made more progress if I had kept up the intensity. Yeah, and I think especially with German, there's so many words that kind of look similar because of the like prefixes, and you're like, oh, I know that, but then it's a completely different word because it's, I don't know, the beginning is different, but the stem is the same. I don't know. Yeah, vocabulary is a bit tricky.
Maybe moving on to the tips for beginners, people who want to use the same method. Maybe can you give 1 or 2 tips where people should start out, or what to look out?
Yeah, I suppose you could probably best starting with something you've probably watched before, because I feel like that's interesting because at least then you can, like visually keep up with what's happening. I would also test how comfortable you are with ambiguity, because some people are really, really don't like it and they would prefer to watch like Peppa Pig. Some people would watch children's shows because it's really, really, really simple. And then some people would want to watch their favorite sci-fi show in their new language, even though they understand none of it. So there's very different levels that you can start with, and it's sort of figuring out what are you comfortable starting with. Do you care if you can understand, nothing? Just maybe it doesn't bother some people. So I would start with that, like experiment with a few different types of media, and then what would another tip be? If you're not enjoying something, just stop watching it. Stop it, just drop it, it doesn't matter. Like there's so many TV shows and books and everything that I just stopped watching because I'd rather leave it and start something new and actually enjoy it. Yeah, it's like don't be too precious with anything. I like people kind of get like that with textbooks as well. They're like, oh, I've started, I need to finish the whole textbook, but if it's gotten boring and your attention isn't even there anymore, just do something else. It's, I don't know, go with the flow.
Yeah.
Whatever like actually is enjoyable. That's like with immersion, it's like it just has to be enjoyable. Otherwise, that's just sad. I want to be enjoying yourself. It makes things easier. I don't know if I have any concrete example tips. Like test out Anki. Some people don't like it, but it can be really, really useful just for like priming your brain for new vocabulary. Or if you don't like Anki, there's like, what's that website? Link for Reading. I know that's, some people use that. That's good for like beginner vocabulary stuff or whatever method of learning or becoming familiar with vocabulary that you enjoy. Like memorize is another thing that people can do. But just as long as you're, doing immersion, like the word learning is supplementary to the immersion. It's the most important bit.
Yeah. Thank you very much, India. And maybe if people don't want to do it alone, is there like a community where they can go?
Yeah, so the immersion learning community has gone through a couple of changes over the last few years, but at the moment the best place to find people is through Refold. So that's the newest incarnation, I will say, of stuff. And they have a lot of information. They've made it really, really accessible for beginners. So they have guides on, like language agnostic guides, just on how to get started with immersion that are very, very detailed. And then there's also Discord servers that are completely free, and you can they've all language specific Discord servers. So I'm in the German one, and you can ask questions there, and it's usually pretty active. People are very, very helpful. They have very good mods, at least in the German one. Like it's, it's nice. So there'll be a lot of support there. Like a lot of Discord servers seems to be where it's at. Get a lot of interesting discussions. Yeah.
Okay. And I will put the links in the show notes, of course. And if listeners want to know more stuff about your journey, they can head over to your channel, and I will also put the link into the show notes, because there you go really in depth and you talk about your journey every like 3 months or so. You give,
I think for the first year.
And I wanted to ask you also, do you have a favorite expression in German or a favorite word?
I do. It's such a strange word. I think it's really like slang. I don't know. I think you saw it in the sheet. Gönnjamin. I just think it's funny. I named my laptop Gönnjamin because I spent a lot of money on it, and I thought, I don't know. I feel like it fits a little bit. I think it's a fun word. I hear people use it in like what was it? One of the reality TV shows that I was watching. I think the verb gönnen is kind of nice. I don't know if we have anything exactly like that in English. It would kind of be like, what, treat yourself almost. That verb actually took me a while to understand because I didn't know what was happening. I was like, I don't know what this concept is. So yeah, I like that. I like Gönnjamin. Yeah.
I like it also. It's really amazing, and I have to say that I didn't know the word, to be honest, and it reminded me a little bit of Benjamin Blümchen. There is an elephant, in like a comic or something like that. But it's really amazing. Thank you for sharing this with us. And
pleasure.
Maybe do you want to add something to our conversation?
I did a bit of reading in the beginning. Like, I didn't read very much. Some people really do like reading, but I don't know. It depends what you're into. But the only thing like I will say is, I suppose like the immersion learning where it started was very extreme with AJATT specifically, and that can be very off-putting for some people because the mentality around that, it was a lot of young boys, like, you know, teenage boys who were doing it, and they weren't the most nice people, to be honest. Some of them were absolutely lovely, it's fine, but it did get a bit of a reputation for not being the nicest community, and that's why a lot of people have tried to like change it so it was like MIA for a bit. That was one of the incarnations of it, and Refold now is very open. You know, there isn't any of that sort of I don't know, extreme kind of dogma around it. It was really dogmatic. It was weird. So
but where is the community of Refold? Is it on YouTube? Or is it a Discord?
It's the Discord
server?
Communities. Yeah, it's in the Discord servers. So that's probably the most general place to find things now. But I would still encourage people who are really interested in it to find the table of content for the AJATT blog, because it's a very interesting blog. It's not for everyone, but I find it really, really motivating. And sometimes I would go back to it and I would watch, or I would reread some blog entries, or I would watch some of Matt versus Japan's videos. Again, his style is not for everyone, which is fine. Just take whatever information, you know, is helpful, essentially. But there's a couple of different places that people can go, but Refold would be the most applicable one now. They're doing a lot with the community. They have a lot of resources and a lot of, I think they have their own podcast now as well. That's on YouTube. So there's loads of help for beginners and all different levels as well. Yeah, so highly recommend it.
And I think you published your last video like 1 year ago or something like that. So are you still learning German?
I am.
And
will there be I just haven't done too much.
New video?
I mean, there could potentially. I thought about doing one again in German, just talking about the trip that I did in Berlin. I might be going on an Erasmus term to Stuttgart next year, so I could do something about that. I don't know, but there hasn't been any like developments in my like skills, you know, because it's gotten to the end of, you know, the learning isn't happening so quickly anymore, so there's not as many new things to report. But yeah, been thinking about it.
Maybe it's time to start learning Japanese then.
Oh God, I thought about it and I was like, you know what, I have no interest in Japanese. I have a tiny interest in Chinese, but not enough to learn it. I think if I ever learned another language, it would be Spanish. I want to do an experiment of trying to learn Spanish just through Dreaming Spanish videos. I think that'd be cool, because that's immersion. Like, that his whole thing is so cool. The whole Dreaming Spanish concept and the fact they have so many videos is amazing. Like, the people who are learning Spanish are spoiled rotten. Like, it's cool.
It's really a pity that it's not in Italian, because I try to learn Italian right now by listening to podcasts, and I got a little bit stuck there, because the next step is to interview people in Italian, but I am scared. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I have another question, because nowadays we have artificial intelligence like ChatGPT and apps like that. And when you were making your videos, they were not available back then. So, do you think your journey would have been different with ChatGPT, for example?
Not significantly, no. I don't think so. I think I can see that there are people that are making really cool tools that are using things like ChatGPT, especially for like writing practice as well. Seems to be cool. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would have used it too much. I think it was, I don't know. I experimented with it a bit last year, but I didn't find anything particularly revolutionary for language learning in it. But I think the stuff that's going to come out with ChatGPT and all that kind of technology is going to be amazing. Like, it's, yeah. Poof. Just the
Yeah, it's
what's happened so
mind-blowing.
far is crazy. It really is, exactly.